Welcome to the Keep Yours podcast, where we'll help you decode the complex financial system so you can better understand how to thrive within it. This is where you'll learn strategies and life hacks to stay out of debt, claim your financial power, and keep what's yours. Here's your host, David Bradshaw.
Citizens of the world, welcome back to another podcast at Keep Yours, a survival guide to capitalism. Today we are discussing basics of economics, basics of capitalism, and the philosophy of this podcast. So one thing I want to make very, very clear is that I am for capitalism, but I am not for the current state of capitalism. I do not believe that the current state of affairs that we have is fair, creates incentives for everyone, and gives everybody the personal choice that they deserve. However, one of the reasons I started this podcast is because there is so much energy out there right now, especially among millennials, supporting a socialism platform. And we're seeing this now with politicians as well, where they're getting on board with the socialism platform. However, what they're not talking about is how this will be paid for, who's going to pay, and how it's going to work, and how does it work other places where they've started to institute some of these ideas. And my fear is that the things that we hold dear in this country, personal freedom, liberty, personal choice of what you want to do, and the availability that you could go pursue whatever it is that you dream of doing, I believe all of those are valuable things. And if we switch to a different economic system, and therefore it would go hand in hand with likely a different form of government, democracy and capitalism are pretty much joined at the hip. If we switch to one of these other systems, we're going to lose a lot of those things. And today I'm going to describe that in terms of what life might be like for me, had I been born not in the USA, but maybe had I been born in Venezuela and watched what's happened there as that country has turned from a capitalistic society to a socialist one on a socialist platform, or what that would look like if we lived in a communist society like Russia or China. And I want to talk about that from a personal experience level of, would these opportunities be available? Would my decision-making be my own, or would it be made by somebody else? And would the fruits of my labor be my own, or would those also belong to somebody else? So I think it's very important to differentiate between capitalism as a theory of a system and the way that it's deployed today. And in the next podcast, I'm going to go into the details of what capitalism is and the history and the mechanics of it. Today, I want to talk about the difference between capitalism, socialism, and communism, and how what we perceive right now, especially in the millennial generation, of what might be a good thing and what might be more fair, might actually turn out to be the opposite. So, briefly, I'm just going to discuss the differences. So, capitalism is based on the idea of private ownership. And private ownership means private means of production. So if I want to open a factory that makes tables, then I am free to do so in a capitalist society. Okay, I'm free to own the land that I want to build my factory on. I'm free to own my home. I'm free to purchase goods and sell goods as I see fit. Capitalism's other tenet is there's free competition, so that if anyone else also wants to start a table factory and build tables, they're free to do so. And the government's job is not to determine who gets to do something or doesn't, but just that there is a free market so that I don't, for example, sabotage my competitor. The third tenet of capitalism is supply and demand. So capitalism says, the market will decide whether or not somebody wants to buy my tables. The government's not guaranteeing that my tables will be purchased. They're not guaranteeing a price that I can charge for my tables. They're not guaranteeing that I make a profit. It's up to me and the free market to decide whether or not I should be in business making tables and what price I can charge for those tables. Communism, on the other hand, is the idea that everything is owned by everybody. So in theory, that means that all of the resources of the country are owned by all of the people. There is no private ownership, so everything is owned by the government. So if I want to make tables, I can't set up my own table factory. I'd have to go work for one owned by the government because I'm not allowed to own any property. That's not mine. I'm not allowed to own my own house. It's never your property. It always belongs to the government. Socialism is very similar, and it believes that the wealth and income should be shared equally, but they don't believe that all private property should be eliminated. So the idea is that, well, you can own the house, and maybe you can start the table factory, but it's really owned by all your employees and not by you individually. Even if you're the one that started it, it's a community asset. So it's kind of a in-between. And what you're going to see in the world today is that nobody's got a system that's 100% any of these things, for the most part. That's not actually true in Venezuela right now. Pretty much they say that the government owns everything. But what's often left in communist and socialism circles right now is that you could still have some private property of residents, but that property in theory belongs to the state, so it could be taken at any time. So what's really important to distinguish is that the way that capitalism is done now is not based off of the true philosophy of capitalism. It's been changed by government laws. And as government laws skew what would be considered pure capitalism, i.e. a true free market. Okay, let me give you an easy example of that. If the government decides, and it has decided in the past, that certain agricultural products are preferred by the government, then they will give people incentives to grow those. And they will sometimes guarantee a price. So if you're a farmer growing corn or soybeans, the government may step in and say, we're going to subsidize this farming because we want more of it. And they could subsidize that in many ways. They could literally just give people a check for having a farm, or they could give them a certain amount of money based on the production of that farm, or they could guarantee a price for those crops such that if they're not able to sell in the free market, the government will step in and buy them at a different price. That's not a free market. But in many ways, that's the market we live in today. And what you see a lot of governments fighting over is which governments give which industries in their countries benefits that are legal and not actually part of real form of capitalism, of true philosophy of capitalism. So if you allow the free market to decide everything, then that's real capitalism, where people truly have choice, where government's role is very reduced to just making sure that the market is free. But that's not the world that we live in today. And depending on how much these government regulations affect what's going on, you end up with what I would call crony capitalism, which is where private interests have taken hold of government and gotten government to make laws that protect them or support them or give them free money. And that's crony capitalism, because that's not the way the system's supposed to work. It's just the way that it's working today. So an easy example for that right now is solar panels. So my dad was involved in solar panels back in the 80s. And the real reason that the company he was working for did well when it did was because there were rebates from the government. So if you installed solar panels on your roof, then the government basically gave you back the money for the cost of those solar panels because they wanted to support the solar panel industry. Well, that's certainly not a free market. And you have the same thing with electric cars and solar panels today, where there's a government rebate. If you buy an electric car, you get a government credit. Well, if you don't make electric cars, but you make combustion cars, then that's not a free market to you, because you say, I have a car that somebody has to pay for. They don't get a government credit for. Oh, but the electric car guy does get a government credit. So that's distorted the free market. Now it's not free. Now it's changed for the person who's making that electric car. It benefits them while not benefiting somebody else. You see that right now with student loan debt. So it benefits the banks that the student loans aren't discharged in bankruptcy, but the government didn't come back and put protections in for students. So there's crony capitalistic ideas happening all the time when government's starting to create more and more laws around what can and cannot happen, instead of sticking to their role of saying, hey, we're creating a free market and we're protecting citizens and we're protecting the environment. Those should be the main roles of government in capitalism. So I'm not defending what's happening today. And in fact, I have a lot of ideas and potential solutions to address some of the problems that have been caused today. But let's look at what life would look like if you were born into a different system. Okay? So being born into the United States, in my opinion, that's like winning the lottery of where you're born, because of the opportunity here, because of the true freedoms that you have in America, the freedom to choose what it is you want to pursue. You can go learn about anything. You can go work for whoever you want to work for. You have personal choice in your job. You can decide, if I'm tired of working for everybody else, I'm going to start my own business. So now imagine you're born into Venezuela. Now, and even let's say I was born into Venezuela at the exact same time. In the 1970s, Venezuela was a democracy. And then about 20 years ago, it got taken over by socialists. And this is why socialism, of what the millennials believe about it, is so frightening to me. Because Venezuela is the most acute, in our face, right now, real example of a country that decided, hey, we believe that more and more should be distributed to everyone. So we're going to have the government take over all industry. It all now belongs to the people. And we now get to see the impact of that 20 years later. So let's assume that I was trying to be the same me in Venezuela. Well, maybe that means I might have been able to go to college if I could get in. So here's the first kicker. For all of you millennials who are upset about student loan debt, who think that socialism is going to fix that by paying for everything, here's the other side of that coin. It can't. So as soon as you make it socialist, as soon as you say everything is owned by us, well, guess what? To educate anyone has to be decided that that's for the benefit of everyone. Even if you want to learn something different, it doesn't matter. The government's going to tell you what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot learn, the options that are available to you. So even in Scandinavian, Germany, countries where they pay for education right now, you have to be able to get in. And they don't just allow you to come spend as much time educating yourself as you want with everybody else paying for it. Because if we just said education is free today, then great, I'm going back to school. And I'm going back to school for life. Because why would I not? College is fantastic. I get to hang out at universities and talk to people and learn. I could do that for my entire life. No problem. Who's going to pay for that? And at some point, don't I have a responsibility to society then, who's paid for all this education, to use it to then help society? And the theory of socialism is that everybody will do their equal share part. But do I really believe that that's going to happen? If there's no incentive for me to do more, will I? Would you? Let's assume we all went to universal. Let's just assume real socialism. We just go to universal income. So we take all of the money, and this would be in a perfect socialist world. We would take all of the wealth of America and we would all get a check for our 1/320 millionth. Okay? So we're going to take all of the wealth that's created every year and we're going to divide it up to everybody equally. Well, if you get that check, if you do nothing or you work all the time, what do you think's going to happen? Do you think more people are going to work all the time? Or do you think more people are going to do nothing? When they tried this in Russia, more people did nothing. More people chose to do the absolute minimum. And we have a very easy to identify case of this in the United States right now, and it's called trust fund babies. So if you look at trust fund kids who come from very wealthy parents, they typically have very little motivation because they're already rich. So working hard isn't going to generate more wealth for them. It could give back to society. They could go help other people with that money. But is that what's happening? For the most part, no. For the most part, they're hanging out, partying. They view life as a nice experience. But they don't have the struggles. They don't have the hunger. And I'm going to tell you this. If you grow up a trust fund kid, you're never going to be a championship boxer. Because you need to come from a tough neighborhood to have that drive and desire to get out of it. To know that you came from a place that you don't want to go back to. And that's what motivates you every day to get better and better and better. And those drives are what create greatness. And so what I believe will happen with socialism is that even the people, and I'm going to give you 50% of the people will show up and do their duty because they're good people. And probably 5% will show up and do way more because they just really like to work and like to get things accomplished and like to do things, so they're going to do extra. But I would bet, and I bet the real number is way more than 45%. I bet it's closer to 70 to 80% of people will do the minimum required to get their proportionate check. So what does that mean from an economic standpoint? If everybody does the minimum, then output reduces to the minimum. And there's no incentive to do more, so why would anybody do more? If you're going to get the same amount of money every day, if you go to work every single day, and you're going to get $10 for that day, regardless if you build 5 tables or 1 table, how many tables are you going to build? Walk into a union shop and see how this works. I know this from incentivizing employees myself. If I say the quota is 100 units a day, and if you don't do 100 units, then you're liable to get fired. How many units do you think each person produces a day? Across the board, it's 100. And it's amazing how it will be exactly 100 because that's the requirement. Now, change that and put in an incentive to say, hey, instead of $10 a day for 100 units, if you can do 150 units, I'll give you $30 a day. This is a free market principle. A free market principle says you and I can negotiate on what the value of those labor services are, versus the government saying you're going to get $10 a day and that's it. And that's all that's available. But if I say, hey, if you want to do some extra, that extra is worth a lot more to me, I'm willing to pay you a lot for that. Well, guess what? A lot of people will take that. That's called overtime today. So a lot of people will take the overtime hours, getting paid time and a half to show up on Saturday to put in an extra day of work. That's not available in socialism. Everyone gets the same. But output will never, ever be the same. So if I'm me and I'm born in the USA, I have the option to go to college to choose what I want to study. But I decided to study accounting and management, but assumed that, well, we don't need any accounting or managers right now in Venezuela. So instead, you're not accepted in for those programs, even though that's what you want to study. It doesn't matter what you want to study. The state's going to tell you what's available. Students have this idea right now that if we go to socialism, that the school is being paid for by everyone else. School's now free. And the other idea is that, but the options remain what they are today. You can still study whatever you want, whenever you want, for however long you want. All of those restrictions will be immediately removed. So in Germany right now, school is free. But you have to be able to get in, and that is not easy. That's very difficult to continue to get in, especially undergraduate degree, fine. They need a certain number. Graduate degree, harder. You want to get a PhD, harder. Harder to get into each school. Free if you can get in, but most people won't. And it makes sense in that context because there has to be a return to society who is paying for everything. So these people have to become more productive, and you want the odds of those person that are going to go into those programs, the odds of success to be very, very high. So the standards are going to be raised. But there's no way that if you made education free, that everyone who's going to college right now goes to college. It's just not going to happen. Now, the education system is certainly broken in this country, no doubt about it. Absolutely needs an overhaul and a change. But switching to socialism is not going to fix it the way that everyone believes that it will. Now, so if I'm born in the USA, I choose which college I want to go to. I get to pick which state that I even want to go to college in, which university I want to attend. Now, granted, they do have standards and I have to get into those ones, but at the end of the day, I have the choice of which one to go to. In a socialistic country or a communist country, you may not have a choice at all. It may be one option or no option. In Russia right now, you're going to take a test at equivocally about the 6th grade, and the same thing in Germany. Depending on how you do at that test determines if you're going to stay in school prep for college or if you're going to be moved into a technical service field and be trained technically. You're also going to be required to go into the military and spend a year to 2 years, depending on the country. Most countries have that requirement. I actually think that would be a good thing in this country, not just from a perspective of having to serve in the military, but just having to serve. It would give all of us a sense of belonging. And I believe that what happened in this country when we saw the greatest distribution of wealth into the middle class in the 1950s was because so many people went and fought. That when they came back, they said, I have a right to this. I am the one who created this country of freedom. I fought for it, and therefore I feel entitled to some of the profits from it. And I'm willing to work for those, but I want it to be fair. And I believe that in the 50s and 60s, for many people, certainly not for everyone. If you're a person of color, it was certainly not set up free, and it's still not. But let me take myself back and put me in another. So now I'm back in Venezuela, where now I didn't even get to pick which school I went to. And they said, well, based off of what we think that you should do, you're going to be a farmer. Even though I hate farming, I don't want to do that every day. It's backbreaking work. I don't want to be in a field all the time. It doesn't matter. Socialist country, I didn't get into school. Those are my options. They tell you what to do. But let's say that I accepted that, and I became a really good farmer and worked my tail off. In a socialist country, I don't own the farm or the proceeds of that farm. So I may get to keep a little bit extra of my effort, but for the most part, it belongs to everyone else. So I'm going to get my fair share just like everybody else. I have no incentive to work harder. I have no incentive to create a better farming system. I have no incentive to try and be better about how I use water, because the water's all owned by everybody and a certain amount's required if they want me to grow this stuff. So what? It doesn't benefit me enough to care to try and change it. Now, if you take that into true communism, in a Russia or China system, for example, well, again, you're only going to university if they decide you're going to university. You're going to get tested at a young age. They're going to tell you what to do. And they're going to tell you what job you have, and they're going to tell you how much they're going to pay you for it. And let's just assume that you're really good at, and let's say I have to be a farmer in Russia as well, or China. So they said, no, you're a farmer, and you're going to stay on a farm. You want to move? You're not allowed to move. You're tired of the cold? You want to move somewhere warmer? Not your option. You don't get to choose. We're telling you. We're going to tell you where you're going to stay. We're going to tell you what you're going to do. We're going to tell you how long you're going to be there. So you lose all of the personal choice and personal freedom for the state to decide what's best for you. And if the state was run by people who did not want any power for themselves, were truly benevolent beings, and were doing what's best for everyone in society, then maybe it would work. But we've never had a system with human beings running that who have ever done that. It's never existed. And in fact, in most of human history, since the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, the history books say that 90% of people have been peasants the whole way along. So we have more opportunity today in this country than basically anyone has had ever in history. And now we want to change it and go backwards. Now we believe that because it's not working well here, because the deployment of capitalism isn't good, we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, let's burn the whole thing to the ground and go to socialism. But guess what? You're losing all of your personal choice. You're losing your freedom to choose what you want to do. You're losing the decision making. And from a societal perspective, you're taking away the incentive for yourself and anyone else to progress. There's a reason the United States leads the world in technological innovation. And it's simply because there's an incentive to do so. If I own a business in this country and I spend 15 hours a day at that business because I want to improve the processes that we use so we can make more, test more, do more of whatever it is that we're doing, grow more crops, make more food in the same amount of land. In this country, I get the reward for that, which gives me a motivation and a reason to do it. In a socialist country, they're going to take that away. I'm not going to get the extra. In a communist country, they're going to take that away. You won't get the extra. You won't get a chance to choose. If I was born in Venezuela, Russia, or China, I don't necessarily get to choose to open up a shop and make tables, even though that's what I might love to do. I just want to work with wood in my hands my whole life. Now, maybe it's possible that you end up in that job, but you don't get to necessarily choose it. And your rights are determined by the state. So in the U.S. today, if you get arrested for a crime, you have the right to a trial. You have the right not to be detained without charges being brought against you. If you get arrested in Venezuela, what's your recourse? The military comes and arrests you. You could be a senator and they come and arrest you. Read the paper. This is literally what's happened the last few years. In Russia, if you don't agree with Vladimir Putin and they come and arrest you, what is your recourse? What are you going to do about it? In theory, there's a system there for you to sue the government, but What if you've actually left the country and they still try and come kill you? What are you going to do? Sue the state of Russia? Sue Vladimir Putin? He will literally just kill you. If you don't have free speech, you can't oppose the government. If you don't agree with the government in China and you speak out against it, they're liable to just come kill you. And if you don't agree with whoever's currently in power, and if you used to be in power even, they come after you too. And you have no rights. You have no right to property. You have no right to liberty. And that's a lot of what you give up when you move from democracy and capitalism into socialism and communism. And I love the theory of all of it. And when I was in college, when I read the books on socialism and I read the books on communism, they sound very nice. It sounds egalitarian in that we're going to share everything between all of us. And each man will work according to his ability and give according to his ability. And we all share evenly such that we all have what we need. That sounds fantastic. When has it worked? And the real reason that it doesn't work is because there's no incentives. There's not incentives in place to improve. This is why an iPhone did not come out of China. They copied it. And all those companies are owned by the government so that it continued to spy on its citizens. In China right now, as a citizen, you have a citizen score. If your citizen score drops below a certain level, you can't buy a first-class plane ticket. You can't get a visa to travel out of the country. These are the kinds of freedoms that are taken away for the communist state, where the government has control over everything in the name of the people. But it's not really for those people. And again, I don't want to defend what we have here in the U.S. as pure democracy, as pure capitalism, because there's definitely problems with it. But what I want to point out is that compared to the problems created in those other systems, capitalism seems like the clear winner. In the next episode, I'm going to go into great detail of how capitalism is supposed to work versus how it does right now in this country. So, the basics of what I want to get what I want to get across to everybody, is that we have a deeply flawed system currently happening in the United States. However, it is the only one that has freedom and liberty and the potential to create the right incentives for the right people to continue to improve the lives of not just the people who do well, but the whole world. And does it need changing? Absolutely it does. Are there lots of laws that have been created by private interest groups that don't make it a fair playing field for everybody? Without a doubt. Absolutely. I'm not defending the current state of capitalism, especially in the United States. It definitely has lots of room for improvement. And I hope to bring up some of those ideas for improvement, because I think that's where we need to get back to. When we're having the debate over, is capitalism better than socialism? The only question is, do you want to be able to choose what you do with your life? Do you want to be able to choose what you study? Do you want to be able to choose who you work for? Do you want to be able to work for yourself? Do you want to be able to choose to start your own business? Do you want to be able to choose to do things that are engaging to you, that you like to do, that you want to learn about? Or do you want somebody else to tell you what to do and have the ability to come and take everything that you believe is yours at any moment? If the state owns everything and you don't have rights of personal property, then the home you're living in that you think you've paid for, that's not really yours. It's owned by the government. And they can come take it whenever they want. And they can come take you whenever they want. And so you lose the freedom to speak your mind. You lose the ability to vote for representation. So we're walking down this brand new path that's only been available to humans for the last couple hundred of years. Before the United States, the world was ruled by the sword entirely. The sword, the gun. Gun, germs, and steel breaks that out very, very readily and shows you how the world was taken over. People forget that at World War II, the attacks on Great Britain viewed that not as just, the Germans might come attack our island. It's, they're attacking our empire. And go look at a world map of all of the countries that were still under Great Britain post-World War II. India, a place of billions, run by the British. We still have the British Virgin Islands. Belize was owned by the British. Brazil, owned by the Portuguese. Most of Central and South America, owned by the Spanish, run by the Spanish. Colonialism took hold, and whoever had bombs and guns and ships controlled the world. So it's only recently that humans even have this great ability to make their own choices. And if you're born in the US or Australia or Canada, and Canada's skewed towards socialism, but still has most of capitalism built into it. And that's probably more the model we need to seek to. And there are things that need to be changed. The inequality of wealth is growing, and that's from bad government policy. There are ways to reduce that. There are ways to eliminate it almost entirely. But if we give people no incentive to work and produce more, if we take away the incentive to innovate, if we take away the freedom to make our own choices, I don't think anyone's going to be really happy with that outcome. So instead, I propose that everyone learn about the system, what it is and what it isn't, how it's working for them and how it's not, how it could be improved and made better, and let's focus on those things instead of trying to kill it altogether. Instead of saying capitalism's bad because it creates incentives for people to take large amounts of wealth and not share. Which really, it's not the incentive to do that, it's just what happens. And if you look at what most really wealthy people are doing with their money in this country, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and they've even got the younger kids. They got Zuckerberg on board too. These people are giving the majority of their wealth back. Because they know it's not theirs. They know, and you can't die with it. You can't take it with you. And perhaps that should be more of the requirement than their option. And make no mistake, their estates would be taxed heavily too. And there are taxes in this country to try and prevent some of the wealth inequality. But they're not working very well because guess who's making the rules? The rules are being made by the wealthy. So guess who the rules favor? The wealthy. Okay? That's not pure capitalism. That's not a free market. That's not the government deciding here's what we should do and let's tax each according to their ability to pay. That's, let's change the laws and the rules so that they favor us. Well, that's not real capitalism. That's crony capitalism. And we all agree we don't want that. So this is my introduction of the information that I want to give out there. I want to put out and give people the ability to take back their financial control of their life, to understand the system that we live in, to understand it's not perfect. But at the same time, we don't want to kill it. The other systems out there sound terrible to me. No freedom of choice. Do your own dreams and build the company that you want to, or work for yourself. These are important tenets that I love about capitalism, that I love about living in this country. Free speech is a huge one. Being able to even talk about this. So the fact that I can sit here and talk about and publish what I don't like about the government and things that I need to change. You can't do that in Venezuela. You can't do that in Russia or China. Not without severe consequences. And in China, they typically come and arrest you. And then they beat the shit out of you for months until you agree that, hey, I will say whatever you need me to say, that I did something wrong, and I agree to no longer speak out against the government. Or they just kill you. But in China, typically they arrest you and beat the shit out of you. So I like the fact that I live in the U.S., where they can't just arrest me because I've spoken out against them, where I have laws set up to protect me, even from the government itself. And if we move towards socialism and give government all of that control, well, guess what? In the same context that we've got people right now that are changing the laws for their own benefits, we're going to end up with the same people changing the laws of socialism for their benefit, such that it basically enslaves all of us to them. In Venezuela, many people are starving right now because the government's finances are so out of control. They have 10 million% inflation. That means that $1 that you had at the beginning of the year, the value of that now, you need 10 million to buy the same thing that $1 bought a year ago. Because they're just printing money. They just keep adding zeros. That's not a society we want to live in. That's not a society that I want to be a part of. So instead, I'm going to not defend the current state of affairs, but I will defend the idea of the system, because it's not the best system in the world. It's just the best system in the world thus far. So that's the philosophy here. In the next episode, we're going to come down and break down capitalism and what it really is and how it's really supposed to work and how it's not working right now. We'll discuss a few potential solutions for it and some things that just need to be worked on and figured out. So, thank you for listening. Catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Keep Yours podcast. If you like what you've heard, head on over to iTunes to subscribe and leave us a review. This will help us reach more listeners, grow the show, and keep putting out more episodes like this one. Check out show notes and more resources at www.keepyours.org. See you next week.